Yes, we're about to use a broadcast. I'm about to view a broadcast on YouTube. That is what I want to do, after all. It's a broadcast I'm very interested in viewing. Alrighty. Let's get that Alaskan Fury manuscript up and going. Yes, I'll be sure it's the actual manuscript and not the teaser this time. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm double checking that right now, actually. Just to make doubly certain that that is indeed what we are doing. Oh, that would explain why I couldn't find it. It's because the Alaskan Fury manuscript was in the Alaskan Fire folder. It's almost as though if you put something in the correct folder, it becomes easier to find. Oh, look at that. Soundbooth Theatre Live. Not simply for entertainment, but education. The more you know and such. All right. Load, damn you! Load! Gotta switch over to the old Ableton Stream Deck. Get my Stream Deck hand ready. Make sure we are duly hydrated. All right. Bound to a gingy. The winds breathe foul today, Mondib. All right, here we go. Oh, hello, Kyra. I have draft number 9. Is that the correct one? You've got draft 11. I have draft 9. So if you want to send me draft 11 right now, I can get that immediately remedied. I'm psyched for this one, too. Yeah, send me draft 11 then. We'll get this fixed immediately. We'll get this fixed right now. Right now. Yeah, please do. In the meantime, I'll stand here and just be generally entertaining. How's everyone doing? Who have we got watching? We have 9 people watching. How are you 9 fine people doing? Or I guess it would be 8 fine people, because I know one of them is me, because I have the YouTube stream open in one of my tabs to make sure that the stream is good. So... yeah. Oh, this will be good. I'm so excited for this. I've been wanting to voice Akhrab for quite some time now. I'm doing well, thanks. I just wrapped up recording and all of the edits and stuff on another project, a fun little, like, someone described it as Hogwarts with teeth, which I think is an accurate description. It was a lot of fun. I'm doing another book. After the cold read, I'm doing another project called, wow, my memory's blanking. I'm doing another, like an urban fantasy project. But it's very, very good. I'm super excited for it. I have a few urban fantasies, so I'm like, which one do I have scheduled today? I don't remember, but I have a few. I juggle a lot of projects. Now, if only I could juggle actual objects the way I juggle projects, then I would have a backup career as a carnival worker. But in English, yes, I am alive and kicking, as are you, from your message, from what I can tell. We're all alive and kicking, and that's good. I enjoy being alive, and kicking is a useful ability to have, depending on the circumstances. You know, swimming, fighting, whatever else. Okay. That would be, you know what, though? I really want to read Draft 11 now, because if I could actually narrate a hypothetical draft, that would be impressive. Oh, okay. Oh, man. I wanted to narrate something that only exists in the ether of our collective unconscious. But alas, such an impressive feat of narration is not to be. The reviews were raving. It's as though he read something that wasn't was, but could be. My entire concept of existence was turned upside down by this read. Simply incredible. I'm Sir David Attenborough, or rather I'm Zachary Johnson doing a questionable impression of Sir David Attenborough for some reason. And here we have the narrator stalling for time. Sorry, we're just uploading that to my document cloud. Yes, hashtag make draft 11 real. Perfect. Hey, Carrie, how you doing? All right. It's uploading. Give it a moment. Give it just a single solitary moment, and we shall have this production started. The lovely thing about a single solitary moment is I can it's a unit of time I can drag out for as long as is convenient for me. So it's like, oh no, but I meant, it was a long-ass moment. All right, here we go. I think we are... Come on. Okay. Are we ready? Are we ready? Let's make sure all of my Ableton triggers are in good working order. Okay. Yes, initiating a brief systems check. Okay, we are good here. Phone is good, speaker is good, monster voice is good, thought voice is good, speech voice is good, locators are working correctly. I believe we are almost at all systems go here. ARM, and is the record function working? Record function is good. Okay. Throw that locator right there. Chapter 1 start. That's exciting. That's just... Oh, here we go. We're almost ready. If only I could stream. I wish that... I don't know if... I know Discord has this capability, so you've probably seen it if you've seen me do it on Discord, but... God, you can actually see me work in the software. So you get to see what Ableton looks like. Okay. Believe we're all systems go there. And Houston, we are cleared for launch. Or wherever the hell else we're launching from. Okay. In 3, 2, 1. Chapter 1. Bound to a Genie.
The winds breathe foul today, Mondib.
Akrab's words were like a warm breath against the back of her neck, rousing Kashifa from a dead sleep in an instant of total panic. Though Kashifa couldn't see the Genie, she knew he was nearby from the way the drapes seemed to waver above the bed. Over the long years of bondage to the Fourth Lander, she had trained herself to almost see the odd flicker of the light where he danced, half in his own land, half in hers. Some days she was better at seeing it than others. Often it came and went with her mood. Anger made it easier. Fear made it impossible. And there was so much to fear. Swallowing, Kashifa sat up and threw on the facade that had kept her sane these last 3 millennia of torment.
I told you not to enter my room as I slept, Akrab. You have told me not to enter other rooms,
the Genie said, manifesting out of thin air, a 7-foot mountain of ebony flesh glaring down at her.
But not this one.
He gave her a vicious smile and gestured at the small cabin that the Werewolf had built for them.
I told you not to enter my bedroom as I slept,
Kashifa snapped, hating the way the Genie could manage to intentionally misinterpret even the most simple commands.
What is there to mistake about that?
Akrab's violet eyes narrowed on her.
Since this is to be my place of residence, and as I am bound to this land, and our hosts built only one dwelling for the both of us, and that dwelling only has one bedroom, this room is technically not your room, but my room too, making it our room. You never told me to stay out of our bedroom, Mondib.
Oh, she hated the convolutions he could come up with in order to reason out his own actions. It was the very reason she had hunted him down in the first place, and inadvertently begun this nightmare 3,000 years ago. His twisted, monkey-pawing, oath-breaking, selfish rationalizing that had destroyed the city of Jifa, wiped it completely off of the map with a single wish. He had monkey-pawed a kingdom into ruin and reveled in it. So much so that her lord had told her to destroy him. And the bastard of a whoreson had bound himself to her to save his worthless hide, soul to soul, beginning a nightmare that would never end.
Akrab, leave.
While most days the Genie would have given her a snide look and asked her to leave what, now he simply narrowed his eyes and vanished. Too many meanings to words, too many interpretations, too many loopholes. Kashifa had learned this long ago, and had been living in torment ever since. Reluctantly, unsure if the Genie was truly gone due to her own inner turmoil, Akrab kept her as off balance as possible, as often as possible, because it gave him the power to come and go at will. Kashifa nonetheless threw the covers off and slipped naked off of the bed. Her suspicions were confirmed when a voice above and behind her said,
I left, Mondib, and I returned. Perhaps now you will listen to what I had to say.
Kashifa fought a surge of terror, knowing the beast was directly behind her, knowing that her naked form was completely exposed to him. But she fought it down and straightened her spine, hiding it well. She could, after all, use her last wish to kill the monster, and they both knew it. And, having begun the duel of souls so long ago at the oasis of Tafalat, to take his head now was to bind his soul to hers in perpetual servitude, from which only her word could grant his release. It was probably the only reason the creature hadn't already used her body to his delights repeatedly. After all, as he so loved to claim, he was bored enough to drown being imprisoned here. And she knew he craved her body. She could see it whenever he looked at her. Another instruction I gave you, Akrab, is never to spy upon me while I am disrobed.
I am not spying on you. I am standing within arm's reach, fully within the darkness of your lands.
The sneer was back, his hatred firing every word.
Kashifa fought. Nah, that wasn't a hateful enough read of that line. I am not.
Oh, shit, alright. 5 minutes without a fuck-up, that's not bad. I'll take that. Ooh, whoopsie.
I am not spying on you. I am also not recording in the correct track. God damn it, Mondib, don't distract me. I am not spying on you. I am standing within arm's reach, fully within the darkness of your lands.
And my voice cracked.
It's very dry here, it makes my vocal cords itch. I am not spying on you. I am standing within arm's reach, fully within the darkness of your... Damn it. I am not spying on you. I am standing within arm's reach, fully within the darkness of your lands. The sneer was back, his hatred firing every word. Kashifa fought another spasm of terror and turned slowly to look up at him. True to his word, Akrab stood less than an arm's length away, peering down at her over his huge muscular forearms, crossed over his enormous chest. He stood like a mountain before her, his black body like a deeper shadow in the half-light. He wore a thin, gauzy surwal to cover his waist and legs, but not much else. And through the film of silk she could see the hardness there, the longing. 3,000 years of longing, for he made it very plain that he held his imprisonment against her, despite the fact that he was the one to do it. And 3,000 years ago, the longing had been just as strong. Back then, she was pretty sure he would have done it out of violence, out of fury for what she had done to him. Now, she was sure he would relish in it, make it last until she screamed for death. He would despoil her in a heartbeat if she didn't have the Fourthlander law binding him by his own making. The Jinni, of course, made no effort to hide his desire. He knew it upset her, threw her off balance, left her terrified of what he might decide to do as a final hurrah, a last goodbye, one glorious revelry before he vanished like a lick of flame to the wind. It was all Kashifa could do, not to simply break down right there. She fought him for so long, endured his torments for so many eons. It had worn at her soul, left her dreading each new day, each new ordeal he painstakingly crafted for her. Akrab, please. He gave her a malicious smile. Please what, Mondib? Please take your tiny virgin body upon my shaft and pierce you until you scream. Please break your neck. Or please fetch you a shirt. You must be more specific. Kashifa closed her eyes and fought the despair that had been building for 3,000 years. It now weighed on her like a mountain, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to face each heartbeat. Please leave me alone. Just go. Make your wish, and I will happily do just that. By Fourthlander law, he was bound to her for 3 wishes. She had made 2. The third was going to be her last, and both of them knew it. Kashifa looked away. Get out of this room and let me dress. For a long moment, it looked like the Jinni would disobey her, which, due to the way he had bound himself to her and her background in the arcane, could mean great pain for him when she took the shadows of the First Lands and shoved them down the cord at him. It was like throwing water onto a bonfire, and he usually screamed for hours. She hated to do it, though. She was not by nature like him. She did not delight in tormenting others. It was simply something she had discovered over the time she'd been tied to him, which made it all the more horrible when she had to discipline him for stepping over the line. and all the more certain that he would make her regret every breath she had taken for the last 3,000 years if he ever got free. The Jinni vanished. This time he waited until she had slipped a shirt over her head before he returned. "Something horrible is on the winds, Mondib." Kashifa would have snapped at him then if there wasn't obvious concern in his eyes. Kashifa hesitated, chancing a look at his groin. The hardness was still there, but muted, only half straining against the silk. She looked away, disgusted. "Someday, little virgin, you will moan for hours upon my shaft." "Don't call me virgin!" He smiled in disdain. "You prefer whore, then?" Kashifa heard him then. She grabbed the nearby shadow and shoved it down the life cord that the Jinni had bound to her. Just a taste, but it was enough to throw him to his knees, gasping, big hands splayed out on the floor, head down, a low whine building in his chest. For long moments he just stayed there on his hands and knees before her. When he looked up, his violet eyes were full of tears and hate. "You did this," Kashifa reminded him, though her heart was already pounding in frenzied terror under the loathing in his gaze. "You put me in this position, Akrab. It wasn't me. It was your own hand that did this." "Perhaps I missed something. But it was you who just poisoned me with the shadow, when all I wanted to do was tell you about the whispers on the winds." "Because you forced my hand! You threatened to break my spine. You threatened to force me. Every day you make my life a living hell because you were too much of a coward to face your own death when it came!" He slowly worked himself to one knee and wiped the tears from his face with a massive black forearm. "Little wolf, you obviously misunderstand my words." Kashifa snorted in derision. "Your words are fluid, the meanings changing with the winds, as flexible as your honor." She watched his beautiful eyes harden. "That may be, Mondib. But considering that I will be bound to a bag of bones if you die before you make your wish, we both know I will do what I can to keep you alive. And the winds are telling me that you're in danger." He said it with a sneer, like he was relaying information that he would rather see buried in the bottom of a latrine. Kashifa bit her lip, her heart skipping a beat. While he delighted in tormenting her, the Jinni was also always accurate in his readings of the winds. "In danger how?" But the Jinni's face hardened. "Wouldn't you like to know?" And then he disappeared. For good this time. Damn him. Kashifa finished dressing, taking long minutes to comb out her hair, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. As always, the Jinni scared her. He scared her so much she wanted to scream for help from the nearest passerby. But there was no one who could help her. A Jinni's magic was one of the strongest in existence, as convoluted. What do we got this time? Okay. I almost got to the end of the loot brace, damn. Almost had it. As convoluted and twisted as their minds. I need to enunciate that a little more. As convoluted and twisted as their minds. It was almost impossible to unravel. Only a dragon could free her of his curse, and not even a dragon could remove the tether he'd knotted to her soul. That would take her final wish. Kashifa pulled on her gloves. In North America, she had learned, men often tried to shake hands with women out of courtesy, and rather than having to choose between defiling her body or insulting the Phoenix's guests, Kashifa had begun wearing skin-tight gardening gloves under a long-sleeved turtleneck shirt. Thus, once she pulled on her baseball cap, tucked her shoulder-length ebony hair carefully around her ears, and laced up her boots, all that was visible of her skin was a small portion of her face. Refusing to let Akrab see her fear, she straightened her spine and walked out the front door, took the extra time to latch it and sweep a few bits of mud from the porch with a flick of her mind, then stepped down to cross the lush grounds to the Sleeping Lady Lodge.
A new wave of thrill-seekers was arriving this afternoon, and the Werewolf was certain to have concocted some last-minute change of plans, as he had done every time since that first highly successful scarefest that spring. The fourth lander had already had breakfast. Fourth land. I don't like the way I said fourth lander either. I'm going to do that again. The fourth lander already had breakfast cooking on the stove, and she smiled when Kashifa crested the steps. "Morning, Kimber." Blaze said. The tall woman's fiery red hair was braided and wrapped around the back of her head in a Greek-style headdress. A wig, of course. Her real hair was cropped short and tucked underneath, a necessity of dealing with the public. Phoenixes, once awakened, carried sunfire in their hair and eyes. With a wig and contacts, however, none had been the wiser. Tapping her spatula on the griddle, the Phoenix looked over her shoulder with a small frown. "Where's Akrab?" "They act as if he's my mate," Kashifa thought in agony. She hadn't yet managed to bring herself to tell them the truth, though she had the feeling the Werewolf suspected. Indeed, Jack was sitting at the bar, watching her with narrowed eyes, his nose to the wind. Ares damn her body for its betrayals, but her glands gave her fears away easier than if she had written them in a book and handed it to the man. Avoiding the Werewolf's gaze, Kashifa said, "Akrab is indisposed." She sat down on a stool at the kitchen's island counter, pointedly ignoring Jack. "Are there any last amendments to our plans for tonight's guests?"
"Play and capture the babe seems to be working pretty damn good so far," Jack said, grinning to show his fangs. "I say we just stick to that. Hell, they already got the tabloids cooking up all sorts of stories about the lonely beast on the Yentena. Why disappoint?"
The Werewolf, as always, seemed to be rather short-sighted about the whole affair, but Kashifa was being fed from the Phoenix's own grounds, and the abundance of food, after starving for so many years due to Akrab's handicraft, was a blessing she was not willing to give up over a difference of opinions, as the Werewolf so politely put it. Out of sheer desperation, she had given him her word to obey his rule whilst on his domain, and she knew the score. To break that oath was to be sent away. Away to starve, weak, hungry, and alone to face the Jinni's torments. She had done it before, and only barely survived. To do it again, she knew, would finally shatter that tentative hold she had on sanity. A hold that, with his every breath, the Jinni was weakening. "Very well. Am I to take up the usual position with Blaze?"
"I'll come to grab the girl when you two are just finishing up dinner. Lead them on a merry goose chase around the lodge, then boogie off into the woods to drop her in the hole."
"The last group had GPS," Blaze warned, serving Kashifa 2 pie plates full of eggs and fruit. "Remember to check her for a beacon." "What if there are no females? What is our plan in that case?"
Jack chuckled. "Oh, honey, you ain't heard?"
Kashifa glanced at Jack, then up at Blaze. The tall woman sighed and rolled her eyes, then went back to making breakfast. At the bar, Jack said,
"They're all girls this time, baby. I got the whole damn world wanting to crawl up my chimney."
The Jinni's daily abuse left Kashifa loathing the crass Werewolf's casual references to the physical act of union, but she managed to keep her face from twisting. After all, countless people found it an amusing enough pastime. Jack and Blaze were 2 of them. The scent of their pheromones was particularly strong this morning, which only made her gut clench. The Jinn, as beings of the Fourth Lands, were notoriously crippled by the carnal needs of procreation. And sure enough, Akrab reeked of desire whenever he got close to her, and had spent much the last 3,000 years stinking much like the little Werewolf whenever he so much as looked at his mate. Except with the Jinni, there were 3,000 years of hatred behind his carnal desires. He wanted to make her suffer, wanted to desecrate her body once and for all, wanted to condemn her in the eyes of her lord and seal her from her fury, wanted to take her wings forever in that ruinous and sinful act that a man could do to a woman. He wanted these things, and he spent every waking moment making sure she was aware of that fact. "You're not eating, Kimber," Blaze said. Oh, wrong track. "You're not eating, Kimber," Blaze said, looking at Kashifa's plate worriedly. "Are you all right?" Kashifa swallowed and lowered her hand, realizing she had unconsciously lifted it to her lord's tiny winged sword upon her neck.
"She had another spat with her slave," Jack said, wrinkling his nose.
"Damn him!" Kashifa felt her fists clench with shame as she fell under the Phoenix's pitying stare.
"I would appreciate it, Shadow Killer, if you would keep your observations to yourself."
Jack shrugged and went back to devouring his mixing bowl of eggs. For Kashifa, the Phoenix had served up a similar portion size-wise, though she had made a certain effort at presentation, for which Kashifa was deeply grateful. The curse of the wolf may force her to eat like a monster, but she tried in all ways to maintain her decorum and civility. It was one of the only things she had left of her true nature. The Jinni had taken everything else.
"The kids are arriving around noon,"
Jack said a few minutes later, having already downed the full bowl of eggs and wiping his egg-stained fingers on the wet rag that the Phoenix handed him.
"We'll get 'em settled in, feed 'em dinner, then let the festivities start."
"No blood, no pictures." Actually, I screwed up one of the line reads on that, too. Let me just do that section again. Jack said a few minutes later, already having downed the full bowl of eggs and wiping his egg-stained fingers on the wet rag that the Phoenix handed him.
"We'll get 'em settled in, feed 'em dinner, then let the festivities start."
"No blood, no pictures, and no chasing them into the river." She had to add the last one after a young man from one of the latest werewolf hunter groups had fallen into the glacial waters of the Yentena River, and Jack had to go in and rescue him once it was clear that the boy had gone into shock. Only, of course, adding to his legend, the Yentena River Werewolf. Kashifa didn't know who were the bigger fools, the idiots that paid thousands of dollars to spend a week running screaming through the woods, or the Werverine and his mate, who blithely took their money and let his reputation build. As Akrab had noted to her many times before, the extra attention did not seem wise in the Phoenix's case. But then they had slaughtered the last Inquisition recovery group to come for her, and had buried them, helicopter and all, in an enormous pit in the woods. So Kashifa had grudgingly gone along with the plan. Besides, the Phoenix was the key to her next meal, and chronic hunger did something strange to one's thinking when one thought they were about to be dumped on their ear for raising a voice of dissent.
"Afraid to open her mouth for the pain in her stomach. When did the handmaiden of Ares become such a coward?"
The answer was simple. When the Jinni bound himself to her, while kneeling under her blade. Surrender. The word was still bitter on her lips, an acrid taste on her tongue. The Jinni had not surrendered. He had merely prolonged his life in exchange for 3,000 years of torment. And a curse. She had accepted his surrender, fool that she was. She had allowed him to get to his knees before her, present his sweaty black neck for her sword. She had lifted her blade, prepared to cut his lying head from his massive body. And his big hand had reached out like a snake, and he had cursed her. A blood curse. The curse of a doomed man, the last wish of a Jinni on his deathbed.
"May you never kill."
A maiden of death, follower of Ares.
and she dropped her sword as if it had been a fire, the very steel burning like coals in her hands, searing her fingers to the bone. And the look of victory in the Jinnee's violet eyes, the triumph! He'd won their duel of souls. They both had known it, right then. Him kneeling before her in the sands of the oasis, her standing swordless, sun beating down on her blistered hands from above. By surrendering to her blade, he would ultimately win. Eventually, the strain would be too much. Eventually, she would crumble. Eventually, with time, he would get that third wish. And when he did, he would be free to spend his last hours in the First Realm, showing her real torment before he killed her and returned to his homeland, her soul in tow. All it would take was time. And as immortals of their respective realms, both of them had all the time in the world. After Kashifa forced down her eggs on Aqui's stomach, she spent the rest of the morning washing dishes and making beds. Akrab still hadn't made an appearance, though she knew he was Akrab still hadn't made an appearance, though she knew he was close. Either in his own realm, in the half-realm, or in the first realm, he had to remain within 500 cubits of her body. The tether only stretched thus far, one of the many laws of the Fourth Lands. It had started as 1,500 cubits, but with each of Kashifa's wishes it had shortened by 500, reminding her, of course, that if she made that last wish, there was nothing standing between the two of them. No bindings of Jinni law to keep her safe. Around 11:30, while vacuuming the upstairs floors of the lodge in preparation for the guests' arrival, Kashifa heard Jack and Blaze start up two of the four-wheelers out back and head down the dirt path to Lake Ebony. She shut off the vacuum cleaner and tucked it away in a closet, biting her lip. Akrab still had not shown himself. As his only entertainment within 500 cubits, the Jinni usually could not resist taunting her with his presence. That he refused to appear now left the little hairs along Kashifa's spine tingling with unease. 45 minutes later, the group of girls, 8 in all, arrived on the back of the four-wheeler cart out back, giggling, asking Blaze questions about the Yentena River werewolf. Kashifa reluctantly went down the stairs to meet them. When Kashifa got down to was grinning like an idiot as he carried the girls' luggage up the stairs to the guest bedrooms. The guests themselves were dressed in various states of casual attire, from a brunette in jeans and a half-buttoned flannel shirt reeking of mosquito repellent, to a blonde, Nordic-looking woman in tight black leather, showing a good portion of her smooth, trim stomach. A pretty gemmed belt, its golden plates studded with large pieces of what looked like turquoise, topped the ensemble. Blaze sat them at the bar and served them iced tea while they chatted, obviously excited out of their tiny minds. Seeing that there were no men in the group, Kashifa stepped up and offered her hand to the blonde delicately. "My name is Kimber. Welcome to the Sleeping Lady." She had learned long ago that it was better to just give people a name they were familiar with than try to get them to pronounce the name of her homeland. The blonde gave Kashifa a dubious look down her long nose, and Kashifa found herself caught a bit off guard by the agelessness of her face, where she could not say with certainty. Where she could not say with certainty which decade of life the woman was in. Her black leather outfit reminded Kashifa of something she had seen on TV, a show about hunting vampires, so she guessed the woman was rather young, possibly just out of her teens. Yet there was something almost familiar about her steely gray eyes when the blonde woman sniffed and said, "Oh wait, I need to make sure I remember who that is. I think this is either Imelda or Zeneda. But let me double check. I have the other script. Open.
check how I read that one in the teaser. I want to keep that consistent. I want to keep that nice and consistent. Let's check how everyone's doing while that's loading up. Oh, it's Yentena? Cool. Thank you. Draft 11 is now officially real. Okay, if it's Yentena, then I'll do that as her. Let me pull up my Yentena voice so I can remember how we talked about me voicing her. Obviously, that's gonna be Annie, since she's those characters in Alaskan Fang, but all the same, I want to make certain that I've got those correct. There's the voice combo we had. And then I think she'd have, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Yentena. Ha, Sebastian. I forgot how much you hated him. Isn't he coming up in this? Alright. I think she would want to disguise. Yes. She'd want to disguise her voice for this, right? Because I know she has kind of an accent naturally, but I guess Annie already knows what to do here. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I'm, giving proper direction, but yes. You've got an accent. Where are you from? Oh, she doesn't care? Okay. You've got an accent. Where are you from? Okay.
If only our sisters could see us now. The great blade of morning rots on occasion.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. She doesn't care. She's too egotistical for that. Fan-friggin-tabulous. Let's do it. All right. Oop, I lost my place. No! Not my place. I need that. I need that. Damn it. Oh well. Okay. I'll find it. Where was I? You've got an accent. Okay. Okay. Just give those a couple. You've got an accent. Where are you from? Okay. But very egotistical. All right. Let's do this. Let's do this. This is a thing which we will do. Whoa, what the hell? Play back for me, Ableton. What are you doing? So Annie will be in Chick 3 and 4. You've got an accent. Where are you from? Of course. So many in this country looked at her with distrust simply for her appearance. Like Kashifa was going to randomly poison their tea and louse their beds because her skin was darker than theirs. Arabia, Kashifa said, giving another courteous nod. Though it's been many years. She thought she saw the blonde's eyes sharpen,
but the woman sniffed and flung her impressive knee-length braid over a shoulder. As thick as it was, Kashifa wondered if the woman had used hair extensions.
And what's your job here, Kimber? I cook and I clean.
It was an answer that they could hardly argue with. After all, in America, the darker the skin, the easier it was to be ignored as a servant. Blaze, blessed her, seemed at least a bit taken aback by the woman's abruptness. Kimber got here as an exchange student. Decided to stay once she had her degree.
Degree in what?
Bed making. It was almost a sneer. Faced with such outright disdain, Kashifa bit her lip and stepped back, deciding to let the lady of the house do the talking. After all, she was as much a guest in this place as the rest of them. Public relations. The Phoenix's smile had cracked. Would you like more lemon in your tea?
I'm good. So, where can we find this werewolf?
The conversation went on from there, Kashifa thankfully forgotten. She slipped to the side, listening as they discussed potential lairs and recent sightings as Jack made his last trip in from outside, carrying the final pieces of luggage over his shoulder.
You have an amazing place here,
the quiet brunette in the back of the group said to the Phoenix once Jack had returned from depositing their luggage in their rooms and plunked down on a seat at the bar.
Fishing lodge, yes? What made you turn to cryptid tourism?
Which launched Blaze into a prepackaged, damn it. That one has been one of those phrases that's always hard for me to say. The other one is into the light. I don't know why. Which launched Blaze into a prepackaged spiel about how the Sleeping Lady Lodge was everything she'd ever wanted come true, and how one nightmarish winter she and Jack had been forced to defend it against 40 mutant wolves.
And you used silver bullets. Werewolves, then?
The ageless blonde in leather rolled her eyes and walked over to the bay window, glancing out at the pens of livestock out back. Oddly, it didn't seem as if the woman were rolling her eyes at the idea of werewolves, but rather at the brunette herself. Some corporate power struggle? Kashifa idly wondered where Blaze had gotten her latest batch of clients. Well, not according to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which launched the whole group into yet another long discussion about werewolves, the government, cryptids in general, and the Yentena River werewolf, who was a lonely survivor of the massacre on the Sleeping Lady's back steps. Throughout it all, Kashifa kept her attention on the brunette, finding something strangely off about her seemingly polite nature in the face of the What the hell? Oh, that's what it's doing. Finding something strangely off about her seemingly polite nature in the face of the blonde's unabashed arrogance. The woman had an accent of the southern states, though it was tinged with something else. Mexico, perhaps? And while her voice had the commanding tone of a businesswoman, someone used to getting her way, neither her looks nor her attire set her apart. She had a professional short-cropped haircut, as was common with the lodge's career-oriented clientele, tight blue jeans, hiking boots, and a button-up flannel shirt, the sleeves casually rolled up her arms. She had been holding her temples off and on during the conversation, as if she had a headache, and she had a gaunt look, like someone who wasn't getting enough food or sleep. And sure enough, halfway through the conversation, she popped 2 small white pills from a tiny prescription bottle and swallowed them down as the Phoenix had regaled them of stories of heritage livestock and her ridiculously green thumb. Eventually, after listening at length to the Phoenix's ramblings about near-extinct livestock breeds and the rapidly dwindling genetic diversity of humanity's food supply, the brunette woman put her pill bottle away and glanced up at Kashifa with curious glacial blue eyes.
I heard you guys had a staff of 4. Are we missing somebody? My friend said he was a real big guy. Pro wrestler or something?
Something didn't seem right about the question, and cautiously Kashifa said, "He left on vacation."
Oh,
the brunette said, scratching at her forearm. Then this is everybody? You guys are all alone out here?
This is it, Jack said, grinning proudly. What you see is what you get, ladies. The Sleeping Lady. Last bastion of civilization out in werewolf territory.
The brunette reached up and fiddled with the sleeve of her shirt. Good.
Good.
But even as Kashifa was digesting the strange taste to that, the woman flicked something forward in a practiced gesture, and a tiny dart hit the werewolf in his muscular chest. His eyes widened, and his mouth fell open in a wet wheeze. Then he slid to the floor suddenly, his heavy body hitting the hardwood beneath his stool with a thump that shook the lodge. Not even sprouting fangs. Oh no, Kashifa thought, stumbling backwards, trying to slam up a shield. Jack? The Phoenix asked, moving forward, frowning. She obviously hadn't seen the brunette's gesture. Kashifa, who had seen it, was nonetheless unable to stop it. Her shield, having gone unused and unpracticed for so long, fizzled in the face of her fear, leaving her staring at the Inquisitors in horror. Whereas she could have ended it all with a single thought before the Jinni's curse. Now all she could do was turn and run. She felt a sharp pain in her spine. Then her legs collapsed out from underneath her. Get the bitch, the blonde woman chuckled. Kashifa's vision dimmed, her entire body going numb within a couple of heartbeats. A steel-toed boot stepped within sight, and the blonde woman in black leather squatted down in front of Kashifa, a sneer on her face. She grabbed Kashifa by the hair and yanked back so that Kashifa was staring up into the woman's pretty Nordic face.
Guess what, beastie?
She yanked something out of Kashifa's back and held it out where she could see. A tiny hypodermic needle connected to a silver vial.
Basilisk venom will put even the werewolf's lights out.
I don't think that one's a werewolf, the unassuming brunette in jeans said. My guess is a wolf, but something is off. Spanish, Kashifa realized, ridiculously placing the accent as her body failed around her. The woman was a Spaniard.
Save your guesses, Imelda. Once I get her on the rack, I will tell you what she is.
Even as she heard the words, Kashifa found herself losing the battle with her eyelids, her world blackening, swallowing her from the outside. Suddenly, like the fires of heaven suddenly raining down upon her, the world came alive with heat and flame, and people screamed. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was the leather-clad Nordic woman above her stand up with a startled cry, eyes wide, scrabbling for something on her gold and turquoise belt. Damn the Magus! He just wanted to tell her his fears, to warn her, and she had called the shadows down upon him. It was taking less and less provocation to set her off nowadays, and his life had become a bitter waiting game. Eventually, she was going to call him for her final wish. Whatever she decided that wish would be would decide her fate. Until then, she used him like the damned slave the werewolf taunted him to be. Akrab was so angry, he was shaking. How dare she? It was vile, and wrong, and totally unprovoked. She was the one who was being unreasonable. He stalked from one end of the tether to the other, his bare feet leaving a tread in the sands beneath him, feeling the scorching winds of the Fourth Lands like a pleasant caress against his skin. Damn her. All he wanted was to go home. Couldn't she see that? Akrab looked to the east, wondering what had happened to his village, his family. He'd had to leave it all behind with his surrender, bound in servitude to an immortal who was just smart enough not to make that final wish, but too stubborn to see that he wanted more than anything to simply be free. Time had worn him down, the ages drying out his soul like the hot breeze of his homeland. He no longer cared about vengeance or retribution. All he wanted was to be able to walk a little further, to tread across the dunes and go home. Damn her. Damn her stubborn soul. He knew she wasn't going to make the final wish. Regardless of what he said, no matter how much he insisted, he only wanted to be free. She would take that to mean whatever she wanted. And she accused him of twisting his words. The obstinate wretch! She had sealed them both into a never-ending hell, from which there was only one escape, and he could see it in her eyes. She'd rather die than let him go. Her spirit still burned for vengeance. She still swung that sword of righteousness in her mind. She still waited for the moment she could lop off his head, offered in surrender. 3,000 years ago, she had been about to kill a helpless man, about to seal his soul to her in eternal servitude. I don't know what the hell servitude is, but I believe the text says servitude, so my brain did a thing there that was not helpful. About to seal his soul to her in eternal servitude for a misunderstanding. Akrab's deeds had to have been utterly misunderstood by the small minds of the First Lands. It was the only explanation for this lunacy. He had destroyed a city, yes, but in doing so he had saved so much more. The man's wish had been typical, greedy, self-centered, selfish Firstlander fare. He had wanted riches first, then women. Then he'd wanted the world. The power to shatter mountainsides with my step, to make the people of the world cringe before me in awe as I summoned tornadoes with my very breath. The man had wished. And Akrab had given him just that, and in doing so had gotten a divine bounty put upon him as an oath-breaker. The damn simpleton simply didn't care about the weave he had seen, had he allowed that wish to play out as the man had wanted it. They didn't care about the destruction that one fool would have wreaked upon the earth in his mortal grasp for the gods. They just saw a Jinni step out of the rubble and assumed he had meddled in First Land's affairs. The hypocrites. And now he was tethered to the one sent to kill him. And she still wanted to with every ounce of her soul. He could see it in her pretty brown eyes whenever she deigned to look him in the face. She hated him. All of him. She hated his very being, his core, and wanted nothing more than to have put that sword through his neck. He tried to tell her what had happened, why that city had fallen, but she had cut him off every time. Twisted words! Your kinds are masters at it. Twisted words. Your kind are masters at it. Damn her. He had learned quickly enough that there was no talking to her. Once his initial curse had worked, praise the gods, she'd been forced to leave her sword at that oasis to be swallowed by the sands. She had been unreasonable ever since, utterly unwilling to so much as listen to him. Just thinking of her perpetually rigid spine, her disdain, her contempt for him made his blood boil. She'd treated him like he was the slave the Werverine claimed he was. 3,000 years was taking an ever more unpleasant turn, and this morning was just another indication that she was finally losing what little respect she ever had for him. How long would it be until she started forcing him to draw upon the power of creation of the Fourth Lands by simply flooding him with shadow until he submitted? It had to have occurred to her by now that she hadn't begun using him to fulfill her base desires, like every other Firstlander he had ever met still left him baffled. But not hopeful. Sooner or later she was going to do it. He had seen it in her eyes. And once she crossed that line, once she forced a wish that had not been given to her, then not even her precious Lord of War could keep the lords of the Fourth Realm from then not even her precious Lord of War could keep the lords of the Fourth Realm from utterly annihilating her and all of the weave-tearing ripples of her ill-begotten wish. But at least he would be free. 3,000 years was much too long to spend tethered to a beauty who would rather spit in his face than share warmth by the fire. Her nightly sight. Nightly sight. Her nightly slight, where she would not even allow him to rest in a bed because he might somehow contaminate it with his presence, was a constant reminder that she considered herself above him, utterly superior to him in every way. Utterly superior, and proud of it. Proud of her hold on him. Proud of the way she could make him grovel on his hands and knees with no more than a mental nudge. If only the little beauty didn't set his damn loins afire every time he saw her slender form. It was one last humiliation, one last jab to prove that she was better than him. She saw him, looked him up and down like chattel, and sniffed as if she smelled something foul. And what was worse, the longer he was around her, the more he wanted her, and the less he found himself craving the other women they happened upon. It made absolutely no sense to him, and left him infuriatingly flaccid on plenty of opportunities for merrymaking over the years. The wolves especially had been fond of breeding, yet for every moon-kissed woman who had so much as looked in his direction, his loins had simply not cooperated, until he had received the reputation of a damn impotent over the years. A ginny! Impotent! It was appalling and disgraceful and utterly humiliating, and yet time and again it was proving frustratingly true. The little winged fury, with her snide comments and outright disdain, had somehow subjugated his passions. Until recently, she was the only one that could inspire his ardor, and she did it even when she was shoving shadows down his cord. Never had Akrab been more frustrated or humiliated than he was now. It was almost as if the gods were taunting him, dangling this forbidden fruit in front of him for so long that now it was all his body seemed to desire. A maiden of the sword, a virgin priestess, an angel of vengeance, a warrior without equal, proudly untouched by man. Until one frightened ginny brushed his fingers against her leg and whispered his final wish. And he wasn't even sure she wasn't bewitching him either. It had been so long since he'd had a woman he couldn't tell anymore. With the hatred he saw in her eyes every time she looked at him, he wouldn't have been surprised. What better way to bring a ginny to his knees? A creature known for passion, romance, lust, desire, the very forces of creation. What better way to break him than taunt him with what he so desperately needed but could not have? In despair, Akrab slumped to the sand, staring to the east, where somewhere across the dunes, his village waited for him around an oasis. If it was still there. 3,000 years and even the Fourth Land saw changes. The sands shifted. Leaders came and went. People moved, decided to try a change of scenery. Akrab had just dropped his head into his hands to stare at the golden sand between his bare feet, when he felt the jolt of terror slam into him from the other side of the link, like a titan sledge to his chest. He grunted, then twisted to the half-realm. The sands disappeared, replaced by glowing crystalline dunes in all directions, overlaid by a barely translucent near-black forest of trees and a 3-story mansion, all of it in varying contrasting shades of shimmering white and black. He was in the backyard of the Sleeping Lady Lodge, looking up at the 2nd story. The winds were rank with danger now, like rot sleeping forth from the land itself, chanting little thrumming patters. The winds were rank with danger now, like rot seeping forth from the land itself, chanting little thrumming patters of danger and flee through his soul. For some annoying reason, the winds seemed to watch over the first lander to which he was bound, though the little Magus had never had the knack to listen to them. An irony, Akrab thought, because he himself rarely ever received such a warning. Hence why he kept finding himself trapped in the first lands, bound to some shadow-wreathed object, waiting for his penance to be served. Through the glimmering yet transparent walls, he could vaguely make out the translucent bodies of 8 women in the kitchen of the sleeping lady, bent over 3 crumpled forms. Recognizing his Magus as the one fallen nearest him, Akrab's heart hammered suddenly, sending out concentric rings of crystal luminescence over the dual land around him in a glowing white wave. The translucent crystal forms of the first lander grasses at his feet wilted slightly, shriveling in the heat of his fear. One of the 8 women squatted beside his Magus and grabbed her by the hair, hefting her face from the floor. Dead, Akrab thought, horrified. If she had died, he was lost, bound forever to her bones, waiting for that final wish. At any other time, Akrab would have flitted inside and blasted them all with the full heat of the Fourth Lands. The winds, however, stayed his hand. Danger, they kept chanting. Danger. Flee. Danger. Who were the 8 women? How had they subdued the Phoenix, let alone his Magus? Danger. Flee. Danger. You know what I think would be cool for this? I'm gonna ask the other actors to record some voices. Who were the 8 women? Wait. The frenzied chant kept gnawing at his panicked brain as he watched the squatting woman lean down, pluck something from his mistress's back. Even from this distance he cringed at the roiling mass of shadow that seemed to rip tears in the very fabric of the half-realm, a ball of black sunfire tracing pathways outward from something the woman plucked from his Magus's spine. Akrab went cold. He knew what that blackness was. He had seen it before, roaming the lonely dunes of the Fourth Lands. A basilisk, a single drop of whose venom could paralyze a Firstlander, or kill a Fourthlander, instantly. Akrab fought down a rush of terror. Bounty hunters, then. Quite possibly a full Inquisitional retrieval team. Here for the Phoenix, no doubt. But did they know they had a Jinni bound to remain a mere 500 cubits away? Or a Fury laying at their feet, her powers hidden from her by the Pact of Realms until she could find a way to remove the taint of the wolf from her blood? 2 top-tier bloodlines. Two top-tier bloodlines, brought low and helpless to defend themselves. His heart pounded like white fire through his veins as he considered. Gods, he had known it was a bad idea to stay with the Phoenix, but as soon as he had mentioned as much... the stubborn little Magus had done the exact opposite to spite him. Vicious, arrogant little beast that she was. Flee, 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 the winds chanted, their urgency building now.
I can't flee!
Akrab thought, frustration and terror building like an unwelcome rot in his chest. He was bound to her by a Fourthlander oath. There was nowhere he could go. What was worse, if the bounty seekers had any sense at all, it was only a matter of time before they found that cord snaking out from his mistress and followed it to its source. And then, the chronic humiliations and emotional torments that the little Magus had heaped upon him for the last 3 millennia would be nothing in comparison to the way they forged his soul to their whims. Then, suddenly, it was as if the wind sucked into one spot, solidifying before him 1,000 angry faces of mist and light. Together they grabbed Akrab by the throat and yanked him off of the ground, leaving him to dangle by a crystalline hand. "Flee!" The wind screamed it, half-man, half-winged demon. Then the thing dropped him and vanished, as if it had never been. In the dead silence that followed, Akrab picked himself up off the ground, his heart pounding waves of glowing white outward through his feet. What? He thought, sheer horror leaving his every hair on end. Was that? But then he saw the cases that the women were opening, saw the vials and potions, saw the arcane contraptions meant to imprison and bind. To bleed. Akrab ran, up the crystalline stairs, through the gathered women at the head of the stairs, making them start, and then twisting into the first realm once he was clear. He brought with him a raging inferno of the Fourthlands, making the fools scrabble away from him in terror, straining to reach their weapons. He bent down to his little Magus, whispered a prayer that she would forgive him, and, just as the woman in jeans flicked something small and tiny in his direction, twisted them both to the Fourthlands.
Nice. Nice. All right. Move the race over, and we will start chapter 2 right here. Right on the 50-minute mark, yeah? Oh, I'm slipping into my hair Drescher voice already, yeah. All right, that's chapter 1. How's everyone doing? Into the light is a really hard phrase for me to say. I don't know why. I've never figured out why I have not been able. Like, I will always, if I see that phrase, I will almost always fuck it up. At least the first time. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying, Sarah. Oh, man. That was intense. That's good. Good stuff. Very good stuff. I knew this was going to be a fun one. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Sarah. I love what you're doing with the writing in this. I think it's phenomenal. All right, so I think that'll bring us. I have time for one more, and then we'll hit a 2-hour cold read, and then I got to go do some urban fantasy a bit later. Because yeah, chapter 2 will be. Oh, chapter 2 is pretty short. Maybe we could do 2 and 3. I don't know. Yeah, but we have time before we hit the 2-hour mark, so I'm gonna grab some water, and then we'll get the story train rolling again. We'll lay more track for the story train, and it's funny because laying track or laying down track is also what they call recording audio sometimes. This has been your dad joke of the day. Thank you. Yeah, the long runs have been a lot of fun. It's been, I was like, yes, I almost made it a full 10. I managed to break a personal record a few days ago. I think it was 17 minutes I was able to go without screwing up. I was very happy about that. Yes, Misty, dad jokes. If you join me, they will happen. I will get you with a dad joke at some point or another. So many dad jokes. All right, here we go. Here we go. Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. The Fury of the Fourth Realm. When Kashifa woke, she couldn't breathe. The air seared her very lungs, and her skin felt as if it were on fire. She sucked in a breath, then choked, gagging as her life wind came back stained with smoke. The world around her was a searing blast of heat, pain, and brightness. She saw dunes. Endless dunes, but no shadows. Above, the sun beat down on them, perfectly centered in the cerulean sky. The Fourth Lands. He used my weakness and took me to the Fourth Lands. The beast was under her, touching her, his big, cool body moving fast and easy as he jogged across the sands. Kashifa sucked in another breath, felt it burn her lungs, saw wisps of smoke curl outward when she exhaled. She choked again, gagging on her words as her internal organs dried and tightened. Her skin was on fire, she realized. It bubbled and hissed from the furnace of the Fourth Lands, eating away at her corpse. "Akrab, please!" Kashifa gagged, trying to form the words, yet unable to force more than an airy moan through her desiccated lips. But the monster seemed to understand, because he seemed almost apologetic as he said, "Not yet, Mondib. They are too close, hunting me." He was killing her, taking her life winds, so she could no longer command him while she died, burning on his shoulder. He was tired of the games. She'd taken too long, so he'd resigned himself to a talisman of bones the rest of his life. "Please," Kashifa whimpered. "Please," Kashifa whimpered, a smoky whisper against her lips. Damn it. God dang it, Bobby. All right, there we go. "Please," Kashifa whimpered. Ah, damn it. "Please," Kashifa whimpered, a smoky whisper against her lips. "No, Mondib, I can't." Kashifa reached for the shadows then, but realized in growing horror that this world had no shadows. Nothing to shove down the cord at him, to force him back to her own... To force him back to her own realm. In growing dread, she simply held on, too weak to fight him. She felt herself burning alive. The pain was so intense that Kashifa stopped breathing.
She clung to his moving body simply for the coolness it radiated, soaking up what little blessed protection his skin provided from the burning sun. "Please, gods, please don't let it end like this." To die and have her soul bound to him forever was a fate that Kashifa could not endure. Just when she felt herself fading, losing her grasp on life itself, the Jinni wrenched them back to the First Lands. Kashifa sucked in a single breath of ice, coating her insides with searing coolness, and choked out another gasp of smoke. She vaguely saw trees, though the surface of her eyes were scorched and dried, until only dim shapes and colors remained.
"I'm sorry, mon dieu,"
the Fourthlander said, setting her to the ground and kneeling beside her. He was biting his lip, his head down, his huge body a black mass hovering over her, covering her, too close. Every inch of her hurt, every nerve screamed. She couldn't speak, couldn't force him to back away from her, to stop touching her. He put his hand to her face, sending pounding waves of torture throbbing through her being.
"Please, I'm sorry."
Kashifa wrenched the shadows from nearby and drove them into him, powered by every ounce of her terror, every throbbing agony of her blistered skin. The monster fell to the ground beside her and started to writhe then, his big lungs emptying in a bellow as he screamed. Kashifa, too weak to move, felt him thrash beside her, his big arms or legs sometimes hitting her and reverberating, pounding hurt, peeling away roasted skin as she was unable to protect herself from his flailing. When the ogre finally stilled, the moon had come up. She heard his ragged breathing from the forest floor beside her, matching her own. As the minutes stretched into hours, she heard him start to sob. When he could cry no longer, Akrab sat up, slowly, so poisoned by shadow that he was still weak and trembling, completely unable to flee to the Firelands. He crawled a few feet away from her through the cold, filthy brush, then collapsed, his back to the Magus. Misery ached through his body with every horrible breath. He wanted to die. More than he had in his entire life, he simply wanted to die.
Oh, wait. Wanted to simply die.
More than he had in his entire life, he wanted to simply die. Yet by his own desperate hand, the only one capable of ending him was unable to kill. Shaking in the aftermath of her cruelty, Akrab stared at the mosses inches from his face. Why had he saved her? Eventually they would have drained her of her magics, killed her, and disposed of the body. How hard would it have been to simply take her body with him to the Fourth Lands? A sack of bones would surely be more merciful than this. Some hours later he heard a rustling. He remained where he was, back to her, still too corrupted to return to his homeland. A moment later, the movement ended in a whimper, and he heard a soft thud. Still trembling, Akrab lifted his head to look. The First Lander had flipped onto her stomach, the only part of her that had been shielded by the heat of his homeland. Bits of moss and forest sediment rested in her blistered, oozing skin. Seeing that, Akrab almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then he remembered the shadows she'd shoved into him, staining his being, leaving his very soul writhing in agony, and had the sudden urge to take her back to the Fourth Lands permanently. And he would have at that point, had he not been too weak and tainted to even feel his homeland. The Magus's breaths were slow and unsteady, the rise and fall of her naked, blistered back coming once every few minutes. She was obviously in too much pain to work her Magus tricks, and unlike a full wolf or an untouched handmaiden, she healed slowly. Much faster and much more completely than a human, of course, but slowly, no longer powered by the demonic entity from the third realm that she had conquered. For in conquering it, she had freed herself of its crazed cycle, and thus its healing. But she still carried the wolf's magic in her veins, violating the Pact of Realms, however unwillingly, and thus his Magus had therefore forfeited the healing power of her true nature as well. Forever, because he certainly wasn't going to remove the Third Lander's curse. Akrab might have done it 2 millennia ago, had she done something other than lift her perfect chin in cold imperiousness and try to demand it. But now, after she had poisoned him for helping her, Akrab would rather hack off his legs at the knee than give her that satisfaction. After this, carting around a bag of bones for eternity was looking a more and more likely compromise. At least the gods' laughter fell on both of them. Him, a Jinni bound to an ice queen who could never know passion, and her, a fury trapped for centuries as a lowly wolf, unable to kill the one who sullied her at every opportunity. And he did sully her at every opportunity. Bound to her as he was, cursed with a Jinni's passion and penchant for risk, it was a temptation Akrab could not resist. And every time he'd kissed her hand or gently traced her graceful curves, she drowned him in shadow for the effort. He supposed that over the course of the last 3 millennia, he had harbored the hope that the great fury would come to realize that the touch of a man was not unclean, that someday her icy facade would crack and allow him to show her the true pleasures of life. Yet it was a hope that over 3,000 years of haughtiness and disdain had gradually begun to fade. Now, after saving her life, only to be rewarded with shadow, it had finally flickered out. She would not change. The Furies were just that. Angels of vengeance devoid of love or emotion, unable to see anything beyond cold, impassionate logic. And he was trapped with her, forced to do her bidding until one of them finally folded. Yes, this definitely reeked of the gods. Akrab had long ago learned to recognize that particular stench, though he hadn't the slightest clue what the Great Ones would want with a simple Jinni. That he was being punished for Jifa seemed so utterly ridiculous to him that he was close to swearing a blood oath against the Lord of War himself. He had saved millions, yet he was tethered to a woman who tortured him for touching her. It was a cruelty beyond comprehension. A few feet away he heard the Magus shift again, then whimper. That she had the audacity to whimper after what she had just done to him left Akrab's age-old rage bubbling up from within. Carefully, Akrab rolled onto his other side until he was facing her, fury powering him now. The Magus stiffened at his movement, her tiny body going stark still in the moonlight, the beauty of her icy flesh now marred by horrendous boils and a skin that had sloughed off to the muscle beneath. Damn. And skin that had sloughed off to the muscle beneath. He felt a wave of satisfaction seeing that. Her perfect body, that she had used to taunt him for 3,000 years, was no more a weapon to her now than was the moss and melted clothing clinging to her wounds. Akrab pushed his senses outwards as he sat up. Over the hours he'd lain there, helpless, his tendrils to the firelands had slowly regained their feeling. And now he was ready to twist back forever. He would take the arrogant little monster with him, and he would never have to feel her scorn or her poison again. Finally, he had reached his limit. Finally, after so many years of undeserved contempt and spite, he had felt something break under the strain. He was a poet, never having taken a soul in his life. But she had finally pushed him too far. He would endeavor to make it fast, bring her to a quick end. But it was finally time for him to find a way to reclaim the life that had been wrenched away from him 3 millennia ago. He inched closer to her, knowing he would have to make it fast, before she realized what he was doing. The Magus turned her head just far enough to look up at him, wrinkling the crisped skin along her neck. And in that moment Akrab saw something he'd never seen before in the Magus's liquid brown eyes. Fear. Fear and hopelessness. and a longing for death. It so mirrored his own internal agonies that he stayed his hand for a moment, shock pulsing like icy waves through him as he met her eyes.
She knows. She knows what I'm about to do, and she welcomes it.
He stared at her, so utterly shocked he forgot to breathe. For so long, he had seen nothing but coldness and disdain in the Sword Maiden's eyes. He had come to think that fear, like its counterpart of trust and compassion, were emotions that a Fury simply could not feel, a physical impossibility built into her very nature, like a sightless vole trying to picture the sun. Yet here he was, seeing fear. He was sure of it. Something within her icy facade had cracked. She lay exposed before him, naked in more ways than one. For long heartbeats neither of them moved. On her belly the wolf trembled, shuddering with every breath as she looked up at him.
"Do it,"
she whispered, her voice a rasp against dried, withered lips.
"End it, Agrab. I tire."
It was her words that made his decision for him. So haughty before, now they were bare and pitiful.
End it, Agrab. I tire.
It was her words that made his decision for him. So haughty before, now they were bare and pitiful, barely alive, pleading.
Make your wish. I can heal your wounds.
She let out a low, wretched moan and looked away, but not before Agrab saw tears. Again he was taken aback. Never before had he seen the Fury brought so low. Even cursed, even without her wings and her ability to kill, she had always acted as if he were perpetually kneeling before her at that oasis, her sword about to sever his spine. She had spent 3,000 years refusing to so much as let him catch her if she stumbled, shunning him outright, doing her best to pretend he didn't exist. He had always assumed it was because she thought of him as she did all men, a lesser being, unclean by the virtue of the flesh that hung at his groin. Yet, seeing her facade stripped bare, he wondered if it was because she resented their condition as much as he did. He wondered if all she really wanted was for it to end.
Mondib, I swear to you, the oath of a genie. I will not monkey paw. I will not twist your words. Speak your third wish, and it shall be granted. And we can end this.
Her face buried in the mosses, the Magus's body shook with a sob, and she let out a sound that stung his heart. Kashifa lay face down in the mosses, waiting for the Jinni to wrench her back into the Fourth Lands. She had seen it in his face, and had known her time had come. But then he'd hesitated, and he'd said, that. Just make her wish, as if she could trust him to make that final wish, after he had twisted the words of her first two into incomprehensible tatters of her original request. If she gave him that last wish, it would free him. It would sever that cord between them, and she would no longer be able to defend herself with Shadow. She couldn't free him, not when he had every reason to stay behind and take that which made her a Fury. Kashifa sucked in a breath, enduring the burning in her lungs, and let it out in long, hopeless sound, the sound of an animal too long in a trap. He touched her then, his big, unclean hand on her shoulder, evoking within her both a disgust at the contact and racking waves of pain from her ruined skin. Closing her eyes against the shame, Kashifa waited for him to take her home with him, welcoming her death. But beneath his hot palm came a wash of cold, a balm against the pain. As Kashifa was trying to comprehend that, he rumbled,
"Some day, little wolf, you will allow me to free us from this."
And then, like a mirage, he slipped away, leaving her skin feeling cool and blessedly whole in his passage. Kashifa drew a hesitant breath. Her lungs still ached, but the searing fire was gone. He'd healed her, as much as the Fourthlander law allowed without use of a wish. She sat up slowly, marveling at that. "Akrab?" Her words were still a tight rasp in her throat, but at least her breath no longer tasted like ashes.
"Are you there?"
The Jinni did not show himself. Kashifa felt an odd rush of panic, not knowing whether the Jinni was simply back in his homeland and therefore out of earshot, or spying on her from the half-realm, ignoring her summons completely. "Akrab!" She received no response. Of course not. Why would he, when it set her off balance to wonder? Gingerly, Kashifa got to her feet. Her body still throbbed where her skin had been crisp and smoking before, but at least it was no longer weeping like a broiled roast. She reached up and touched her lord's talisman, the silver pendant of a winged sword, the symbol of her lord's chosen, and closed her eyes as she worked her magics. Healing the body was much like controlling a moon-kist's shift. It required concentration and focus, neither of which a magus had in ready supply when she was laying in a puddle of her own body juices, her skin bubbled and peeling like a spitted haunch of goat. Tapping into the massive lines of energy moving through the earth beneath her feet with a tendril of her mind, she began drawing the necessary energy for her healing. The rearranging and repairing of her body's... The Jinni, strange as his gesture had been, had done most of the work. Since when did Akrab give her anything without a catch? Kashifa was still worrying over that when an icy September breeze raised goosebumps along her chest and legs. She was, she noticed for the first time, naked.
I gotta wait for the motorcycle to pass, or the engineers will not like that. Low, rumbly motorcycle sounds are very hard to strip out of a recording.
Aside from her lord's pendant, the entire backside of her clothes had disintegrated under the heat of the Fourthlander's sun. Again, Kashifa felt that ancient humiliation, the knowledge that she had lost her power the same day she'd allowed a man to touch her. A sword maiden married to war, angel of vengeance, fury of Greek and Roman lore, and a man had taken it away in an instant with a single touch. It had not been a coincidence. She was sure.
May you never kill.
In that one horrible moment of failure, her god had forsaken her. Perhaps it was the Jinni curse, spoken in a panicked babble.
Oh, wait. I need to do that more of a panicked babble.
May you never kill. In that one horrible moment of failure, her god had forsaken her. Perhaps it was the Jinni curse, spoken in a panicked babble. Perhaps it was his touch, light and fast and desperate. Either way, she would never be whole again, because both of them knew he would never rescind his deathbed wish.
and the bastard loved to remind her of it. He relished touching her with his eyes, corrupting her further whenever he got the opportunity. He was probably there now, watching from the half-realm, enjoying her body while he caressed himself, taking pleasure in knowing he had spoiled one of his enemy's greatest warriors forever. Yet naked was the least of her problems. "A crab!" she snapped, glancing out at the looming forest around her. "Our friends need help. Where did you leave me?" The Jinni did not respond. Kashifa caught herself on the peeling white trunk of a birch tree and tried to get her bearings. The moon had come and gone, leaving the light of dawn on the horizon. Frost crisped the ground under her toes. Kashifa shivered, goosebumps prickling her still sensitive skin. She tentatively sniffed the air, but after locking the wolf into a cage in the back of her mind, she did not have the adeptness at it that one in the full throes of the Thirdlander possession had. All she could tell from the sense of the air was that she was in the forest. Deep in the forest. "Akrab, please!" The Jinni wasn't going to appear, she realized, unless she summoned him. And at this point she would rather pretend he was back in his home realm, not have him there, looming over her, that hardness at his groin, that hateful sneer on his face, that knowledge that he had been one of the only men to ever spoil a priestess of Horus. Out of millions, he had done it. And all it had taken was his touch. Such power, whisked away by the touch of a man. He reveled in that fact, and now he knew. He knew how much it scared her. Gods be merciful, he'd finally seen. And then, instead of doing her the favor of letting her die, he touched her again and renewed the torture. Damn him, touched by a man not once but countless times over 3 millennia. She knew of the Jinni passions. Their kind were famous for it. It was part of their very natures. The very creative fires that fueled their magics flowed through their bodies like water through a river. Over the years, the Jinni had found excuses here and there to touch her. She'd punished him each time, but it hadn't stopped him. He had continued corrupting her, trying to wear her down, to leave her too tainted to regain her wings, should both her Thirdlander curse and his deathbed wish ever be lifted. That fact left her trembling, and she closed her eyes against the unbidden tears. Filthy and unclean were only 2 of the feelings rushing through her as she stood with her body exposed to him, naked as a slave on the block with no way to cover herself. Kashifa reached up again and grasped the silver pendant at her throat. It had been so worn by her fingers over the years that its original form of a winged sword was now hard to decipher through the polish of many years of use. "Lord of War, please release me from this. I fought. I failed. Please let me die, or let him fall, or free us both, but please. I can't go on like this any longer." She felt a brush of wind that rattled the treetops above, but if her master heard her, he remained a ringing silence in her ears. Tears burning her eyes, Kashifa lowered her hand from her throat, releasing the lump of metal and dropping her forehead to the trunk of the Northlander tree. Sometimes, just sometimes, she almost thought she could hear her master after a prayer. This time, however, she got nothing but the wind sliding through the branches overhead. How could her lord have allowed this to happen? 3,000 years of bondage to a beast. It was beyond her ability to understand. Had she somehow mistaken a command? Had she shamed him somehow? What reason did he have to leave her trust thus? She knew she must have done something wrong to be punished so. And now that the Jinni knew her secret, he had seen her fear. Her final card had been played, and he had retreated to his homeland to plan his next move. A move she knew that would be so humiliating for her that it would be a blessing to die now rather than to face it.
Kashifa didn't think she could stand to see that leering mockery in his eyes. That pity, that smirk. She knew deep in her soul that he was going to touch her again. Whether it came in the next minute or the next year, the Jinni had found her weakness, her terror. And now that he could wield that last against her. And now that he could wield that last weapon against her, she wasn't sure she would be able to stop it. Fear, when uncaged, was Omegas's unmaking. And he'd seen what she'd successfully kept hidden for 3 millennia. Damn him to Anubis's filthy blade, the Jinni had finally won their duel. What had started 3,000 years before had ended tonight, when her pain had scraped away the protective layer of her facade, leaving the insides of her soul exposed for his pleasure. No, it was merely a game for him, a means to pass the time until she finally folded, too exhausted to fight him any longer. She knew what he would take from her, too. The last thing she had left. The only thing that remained of the once great maiden of the sword. Once she'd regained a semblance of control over herself, Kashifa lifted her head from the tree and considered her surroundings through the hazy glint of tears. She had all the time in the world to agonize over the Jinni and his torments. Right now, she needed to get back to the sleeping lady before it was too late.
That was about a 26-minute chapter. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. I missed the end of the alchemy book. Oh yeah, that was good. I can tell you what happens if you want. OMG, please keep going. I think I'll do chapter 3 for sure. It's funny to see an author fangirling over her own. I mean, she's a great writer. If I wrote like this, I'd probably fanboy over my stuff. Let's be real. Yeah, I could see absolutely why that's the case already. Really, really good stuff. Good shit. Yeah, King of Alchemy is good. There's a sequel to that one. The Behind Blue Eyes cold read actually is up on the Sound Booth Theater app now. So that one's up there too. And that one, so we got we actually got a composer to compose an OST for us for that. So I'm super excited. But yeah. So a lot of exciting stuff that we're putting out there. Cyber Squad. And then, of course, Alaskan Fury. This literally, just so you know, this book is like, doing cold reads for this or Discord reads for this is kind of like how I'm spending like the morning of my weekends because it's just fun. Like, I'm like, this is just a fun book to do. It's a fun crowd to hang out with, fun book to read. I just enjoy it. Yeah. Alrighty. We'll do one last chapter for the afternoon. And then we shall be... Oh, thank you. Yes, we all loves each other. We shall be back next week for another installment of Alaskan Fury. So my plan for this, by the way, guys, is to do 3 cold reads. So that'll put us, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours in, and then the rest of it's going to be Discord reads. And I'll let Sarah know with... Oh, yeah, I bet. I'll let Sarah know what the dates for the Discord reads will be. But I want to time the release. I want to time getting this to the other actors with around the release of Alaskan Fire, because the corrections are just about done. I'm finishing my last round of corrections either tomorrow or Monday on that one, on Alaskan Fire. And then once that's done, that's going to be finally going to polishing so they can make that all nice and pretty, the audio all nice and pretty for us. And ideally, by the time that's all done, the other actors will be recording their lines on what I've done for this. So, yeah. So I'm hoping to like line up the scheduling for recording completion on this with polishing completion on the other one, because then it'll just be however long it'll take for the other actors' schedules to free up and align with my production of this. Discord is better for chatting, yeah, but like you said, it comes at the cost of rewatching. But we can't spoil all of it. Cold reads are Cold reads are just meant to get you to want to go, oh, I need to know how this ends. Which I need to know how this ends, speaking of. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 3. Let's go.
Chapter 3. A Jinni's Dangerous Game. Akrab watched the Magus from the relative safety of the half-realm, analyzing what he was seeing in this new light. Fear. It had only been for a moment. Only a brief flash in her eyes. But it had shattered everything he'd thought he'd known about the nature of a Fury. He now knew without a doubt that they could feel emotion. And, irritatingly, it had renewed his hope all over again. Even the wisest Jinni could not resist taking a risk, and this had given him a whole new game upon which to throw his dice. Even now, his heart ached at the idea of melting a hole in that icy facade, digging back down to the humanity beneath, and teaching this merchant of death the joys of life. Again, that rational part of him gave warning, told him that he would have better luck taking a viper to bed with him than a Fury. Oh, wait, no, to viper to bed with him than a Fury. That needs to be... The emphasis was on the wrong... Well, word's not multisyllabic, so I can't comically misemphasize that like syllable, but you get what I mean. Told him that he would have better luck taking a viper to bed with him than a Fury. But he was beyond curious now. He needed to gain her trust. That single flicker of emotion had left him awash in possibilities, risks, and wagers that he could not ignore. She called for him, but eventually gave up when he stayed out of sight, hoping she'd take it to mean he had returned to his home. As he watched, his little mistress once again reached up to that pendant she so loved and closed her eyes in prayer. He saw her luscious lips move, saw her delicate brow knot with concentration. Then, after a long minute, she dropped her hand and lowered her head to the tree, obviously fighting the very same despair that Akrab himself felt, no longer bothering to hide it from him. A Fury could feel emotion. With this new piece to the puzzle, so many things were unlocking for him, all the ages of hardship suddenly taking on a new meaning. His first impulse was to use it, to harness her despair and force her to make that last wish, then twist it back on her and disappear. But Akrab's second impulse was much more interesting. The Jinni were a passionate clan. The power of creation flowed through their veins, and carnal desires were woven deep within their souls, a part of their very being.
The idea of taming this little vixen suddenly made him so hard he throbbed. After all, Fury Law clearly stated that an angel of vengeance must remain pure in order to keep her sword, and he was certain she'd rather cut off his head than allow his own sword to pierce her. But while the handmaidens of Ares were figures made of myth and legend, so was a genie, and he had myths and legends of his own. And in those myths, there spoke of a way to conquer a particularly fiery soul in such a way that they could be brought to the Fourth Lands unharmed. To take her back with him. Now that was an interesting prospect, to have that luscious body for his own, as long as he wanted, a slave to his demands. He was being uncharitable, he knew, but the woman had long since earned it. Her stubbornness, her hatred, her own lack of charity. He was sure he could show her a thing or two about servitude once he was free. But how? In order for a genie to unleash the fire within, he had to make her surrender to him, and not in despair, in total, complete trust. She had to spread her legs to him willingly and allow him to plant his seed. Akrab's groin was afire now, his manhood a throbbing ache against his abdomen. Yes, he decided, as her tiny, slender body tentatively moved deeper into the forest. He could find great enjoyment introducing her to 3,000 years of her own medicine. Magus of the First Lands she may be, but her prowess... But her powers... But her powers would have less sway in the Fourth Realm. If he managed to kindle her fire and spirit her off, she would be as utterly helpless to him as he was to her now. And the thought of that was, for 100 different reasons, utterly delicious. Yet it would be a dangerous game he played, for in a genie's seed was his own path to surrender. And then, bound to this world, a lifetime, 3,000 years would suddenly look to be merely a mortal's toss of the dice as he gambled his night away in one of the dens.
You play a dangerous game, Ya Dalakrab,
a part of him warned. The same part, he noted, that had warned him against picking up an untattered... The same part, he noted, that had warned him against picking up an unattended bauble in the middle of the lonely desert, or dueling a pretty girl wearing a tiny steel sword. A sword that, once he had laughed and accepted her challenge, burst into 1,000 rays of light. And a pretty girl who, as his eyes widened in horror, grew wings of eye-searing radiance and gained a foot in height. It had been one of the many moments, looking back, that he wished he'd given that rational part of him a second thought. But yet, what game was really worth playing, unless the stakes were high? A genie thrived on that kind of risk. His very soul sang at the thought of getting his Ice Queen to accept his touch, to moan beneath his fingers, to spread her virgin body beneath him, to tame a sword maiden. Few men could boast of such a feat, and fewer still had survived the final act. For a maiden's first time was interesting.
You play a dangerous game, his rational side warned him again, as he watched her willowy form work its way through the woods, her feminine curves exposed for him to see. Akrab knew that it was a game long, long in the making.
Kashifa found the sleeping Lady Lodge deserted, the lights still on, the generator still running. With every shield she could muster solidly in place around her body, Kashifa went into the shop, and, with a gloved hand so as not to disrupt her magics, put the iron beast back to sleep with the press of a button. Immediately the battery system picked up where the generator had left off, a brief flicker in the overhead lights. Kashifa went to the shop doorway and looked up at the sleeping lady, which loomed dark and dormant over the lawn. She bit her lip, wondering what kind of tricks her enemies had waiting for her inside. Still standing in the entry of the shop, Kashifa concentrated her magic and sent it outward in an inquisitory blast, like a bat bouncing its shriek against its environment. What came back worried her. The Inquisitors had left no spies behind, not a single soul to break the wave of her magic. Everything within range was either dead or taken. Silence reigned absolute. Kashifa glanced down at the concrete floor. Various bits and pieces of the Werevarine's iron monsters lay strewn around, their incomprehensible components bared for all to see. While Kashifa owed the Werevarine no protection by oath, she had come to respect the ill-tempered Northlander for never pushing her boundaries once she had made them known. Unlike the Jinni, who touched her at every opportunity, the Werevarine had only done so once. Somewhere, in the hours of tears and ritual ablutions that had followed, he had gruffly apologized. Kashifa suspected that Blaze had had something to do with that. Yet the Phoenix, the first person that had even come close to being a friend on this wretched continent, was probably even then being drained of her magics by Inquisitor's apparatuses. I gave her my word, Kashifa thought, fighting another wave of anguish. She stepped from the shop and looked up at the Phoenix's dream. The sleeping Lady Lodge sat in the center of a lush wash of crops, surrounded by greenhouses filled to the brim with every fruit tree imaginable, ringed with verdant pastures filled with flourishing animals of all forms, all of which would, within weeks, begin to wilt and starve as the last of the Phoenix's magic slipped from the land, and the realities of the harsh Alaskan fall returned to steal the life from the grounds. All of it was dying before her eyes, an abundance of plant and animal wealth abandoned by those who would take the Phoenix's magic for themselves. Kashifa had to help. Not only had she given her word, but she owed the Phoenix. For no gain of her own, the Phoenix had not only tolerated her, but given her a home. Being a maiden of the sword, Kashifa was cold and aloof by nature. She had to be. She and her sisters were the justices of the battlefields. She was a mediator of the realms. She was one of Ares' hounds. It was her job to kill oath-breakers, those fools who did not obey the pact of the realms. Her very existence depended on her lack of passion, her purity of mind and body. Yet even with all of that, the Phoenix had treated her as an equal. And while Kashifa had never quite allowed the woman to grow close enough to call a friend, Blaze had easily been the closest thing to a friend that Kashifa had ever had. The Phoenix had been kind to her, where all others had either cast her out or simply tried to kill her, once they'd realized Kashifa could no longer feel her wings. And Kashifa had given her oath to protect the woman. The oath of a Fury had no equal. Except, twice cursed as she wasn't a Fury. She had lost her sword. She had no wings with which to fly. Even the mere thought of permanently harming someone left her nauseous. Hells, she couldn't even behead the criminal that had been taunting her for 3,000 years. Still, she had to find a way to help. She had given her word. Closing her eyes, Kashifa stretched her mind, reaching outward to feel the winds in a desperate attempt to determine which direction the Inquisitors had taken her friends. You can't take her as you are, something whispered, like a breath against her mind. Find the dragons. Frowning, Kashifa wondered where the words had come from. Wait, there needs to be more wind. You can't take her as you are. You can't take her as you are, something whispered, like a breath against her mind. Find the dragons. Frowning, Kashifa wondered where the words had come from. It had almost sounded like Wind. Glancing at the iron monsters scattered around the shop, she considered that. The dragons owed her an ancient blood debt, but the Dragon Republic held council in the Brook's Range. That was over 400 miles out of her way, over mountains, through heavy forest, across rivers and swampland. She didn't have time to trounce through the woods looking for serpents. She needed to find the Inquisition. Desperate now, she pushed her mind out further. She couldn't kill, but if she could figure out where the Inquisition had taken the Phoenix, then, perhaps, she could concoct a spell to walk the void and free Blaze, who could then take matters into her own hands. But where had they taken her? Kashifa prodded outward with her awareness, seeking, stretching. She found the blissfully human neighbors of Ebony. She found the blissfully human neighbors of Ebony Creek Lodge still safe within their home. When she moved further, however, she found more homes empty, more people missing. All the moon-kissed. Gone. Kashifa frowned. Gone. The further she looked, the more missing souls she found. Thirdlanders, Fae, Naga, Elementals. Where? Kashifa pressed, pushing further, straining to feel the Inquisitor's trail. Go to the dragons, the whisper came again, insistent. The war has started. The dragons are the key to the... Always loping at the edges of Kashifa's mind, the Thirdlander wolf that infected her blood suddenly found her outstretched mental tendrils and viciously ripped them to pieces. Slammed back into her body, Kashifa reeled into the shelves of tools and fell to her knees on the grease-stained concrete, momentarily disoriented as her awareness tried to regain its bearings. For 2,000 years it had been thus. The Thirdlander, bitter that his attempted possession from the Frost Realm. Frost Realm. The Thirdlander, bitter that his attempted possession from the Frost Realm had failed, now took every opportunity to thwart her out of spite. Much like a certain Ginny. Well, their best efforts be damned. She may be cursed, but she was not helpless. She would fulfill this oath. Pushing herself back to her feet, she strode from the shop and into the small cabin that the Werverine had built for her. The inside had been ransacked, with her meager belongings tossed around and shredded like confetti, doubtless to implicate the famed mutant wolves of the area. Kashifa found a clean set of clothes amidst the rubble and tugged it over her body. Then, without another second's delay, she tugged on the Jinni's cord and snapped. Yad Alakrab, Jinni of Jiffa, I summon you! The mountain of ebony flesh appeared against the curtained wall a few feet away, giving her a wary look. Then you will make your final wish, Mondib? I offer no wish. I offer a bargain. Free me of my curses and we renew our duel. If I win, I will kill you quickly and without pain, and upon killing you I will immediately release your soul back to the weave, for the gods to do with as they choose. The Jinni stared at her so long that she wondered if he had not heard her. Finally, his violet eyes quizzical, Akrab said, I am a poet, Mondib. I tell stories. Kashifa felt herself frown. So? He blinked at her. So you offer me death, little wolf? That is your bargain? A painless death. Our time of games has ended. There are other That is your bargain. So you offer me death, little wolf? That is your bargain? A painless death. Our time of games has ended. There are other. That's hard to do in that accent, damn. There are other lives at stake now. I would have my true nature back, and I would wreak vengeance upon those who have broken the pact of the realms, as is my duty as my lord's justicar.
So, you offer me death.
He was still staring at her as if she had grown a scarab's mandibles. An honorable death. The Jinni glanced at the cabin around him, then crossed his arms over his broad chest and leaned back against the wall, looking amused.
So, let me see if I heard this correctly. As my incentive to free you and give you your powers back, you offer me death.
I gave my lord my oath to kill you. I have no choice. We've discussed this. The Jinni rumbled his amusement, though his eyes were sharp with calculation.
You want my help, little wolf? You will have to do better than that.
And there it was. The Jinni wanted a bargain. My friends are in danger. I don't have time to twist words with a Jinni. A Krob snorted. Oh, I did the narration in a Krob's voice. A Krob snorted.
A Krob snorted. Don't delude yourself, Mondib. The only friend you've ever had was your sword, and you left that in an oasis back in the homeland 3,000 years ago.
The Jinni's words hit her like a blow. As painful as it hurt most because it was true. Kashifa had to look away to keep him from seeing her shame. Her voice cracking, she managed, I have oaths to keep, Jinni. The beast scoffed. As if I give a damn about your oaths, little wolf. They happen to involve my head rolling by my feet. Kashifa narrowed her eyes. You will help me now, or I will get someone else to undo your magics, and I will fulfill my master's command slowly. You understand me, Akrab? The Jinni snorted.
There is no fourth lander stupid enough to unravel a Jinni's weave. There is no fourth lander stupid enough to unravel a Jinni's weave.
Kashifa allowed a vicious smile to play upon her lips. I didn't specify which realm I would seek help from, Jinni. He laughed.
There are no first landers capable of unraveling.
Then he caught himself and frowned, his eyes settling on her uneasily. In the silence that followed, he fiddled with a curtain chain hanging from the wall by his elbow, as if he found it suddenly fascinating. He did not, however, finish his sentence.
So, he wasn't a complete fool.
He knew that she could use her last wish to exchange his servitude to her for that of a dragon, and a Jinni had as much of a chance of twisting a dragon's wish back on it as he did twisting off his own head. The serpents, unlike most First Landers, were very adept at the weaving of words. So, you see, you will cooperate and earn yourself an honorable death by my blade, or you will force me to seek aid from the dragons, at which point you will spend the rest of your miserable life passed around as chattel. The Jinni dropped the chain back to the wall and glared at her.
I have committed no crime, Mondib. That is not what my lord told me.
The Jinni narrowed his eyes at her.
Then your lord lied to you. I never broke the pact.
The mere suggestion that her lord could be lying left Kashifa clenching her fists in rage. Unlike a Jinni, my lord does not lie.
A Jinni does not lie,
the Jinni growled, uncoiling his massive arms. And for the first time there was anger in his words.
We can't, you fool! We're bound by the Fourth Lander law.
Yet you tell me you never broke the pact. My lord only sends me after those who break the pact. He does not waste his time with anything less. The Jinni's eyes were like fiery amethyst when he leaned down toward her, until their faces were inches apart, and bit out.
Then you misunderstood his command.
Once again, the Magus was trying to assert that she had some divine right to kill him. Except this time, she seemed desperate enough to seek out the serpents in her quest to fulfill that ridiculous claim. That, Akrab knew, would not end well for him. The serpents owed his mistress a blood debt for saving several clutches of eggs from being ravaged by the same wolf that ultimately bit her. And while the serpents had already stated they would not interfere in the dealings between a Jinni and his mistress until their bargain had completed, likely because the cowards did not want to become the brunt of a Fourthlander wish, they also had no qualms with acquiring his servitude for themselves in exchange for doing her the favor of returning her wings. And, if he was reading her face right, that was exactly what the little Magus had in mind.
"Then you misunderstood his command,"
he bit out, irritated to the point of anger.
"I am Yad Alakrab, Sand Singer of the Scorpion clan, firstborn son of a Jinni Sheik, rightful heir to a miles-wide gala of dates, figs, and pomegranates around my clan's oasis. I am no more a criminal than you are a whore."
She narrowed her eyes at him then. "My lord told me to kill you specifically. He only gives specific orders like that on very important occasions. Most of the time, my sisters and I were left to our own discretion." She cocked her delicate head. "So tell me, Yad Alakrab, why would the Lord of War tell me to kill you if it were not for your crimes at Jiffa?" Akrab felt a miserable sound roll from his chest.
"Little wolf, as I've told you repeatedly over these last 3 millennia, I have no idea."
She was going to give him to the dragons. He could see it in her eyes. "He told me to kill you," she said stubbornly, as if that ended the conversation, just as it had ended the conversation so many times before. Yet this time Akrab found himself on different ground, fighting a building sensation of despair, because he was looking at a lifetime of servitude to creatures as adept at word-weave as himself, and because not even a Jinni wanted to be hunted by the Lord of War.
Akrab said, "Is there any way you could have misunderstood his command?"
She snorted, as if his words were completely beyond consideration. "His orders were for me to kill you. You, Yad Alakrab, the Hand of the Scorpion, the Jinni of Jiffa, and not any of my sisters, but for me. I was considered one of the greatest of us back before your curse." Perhaps he knew it was going to be a difficult kill. "A difficult kill! I am a bard! I've never killed a sentient being in my life." "And yet you're not dead, are you, Jinni?" Akrab looked away, frustrated. It just didn't make sense. He'd never broken the pact, only a fool did that. And Jinni were not fools. They were bound by law and had the winds of the half-realm to guide them. They did not make foolish mistakes of that magnitude. Hell, one of the only times the winds had ever spoken to him, Akrab had been on his knees, a winged angel of death raising her sword beside him.
"Touch her," they had whispered. "Claim your wish."
And with those words they had saved his life. He had taken wish in that instance to mean a dead man's curse, the final wish of a dying man, and had uttered 4 words that had saved his life.
"May you never kill."
He still marveled at that. So stunned had he been when her sword had slipped from her fingers to bury itself in the sands instead of his neck. The winds had saved him. After many years of silence, after centuries of allowing him to be passed between masters like a favored stallion, the winds had deigned to save his life. They had told him to claim his wish, only to begin a worse torment. 3,000 years, tied to a perfect pillar of ice. It stank of the gods, and indeed he suspected he had somehow invoked divine wrath sometime in his past. Yet how? He'd always obeyed the law. He'd never twisted a reasonable wish. He'd never grasped for power. He'd never broken his pact to his masters, even when their devious use of their last wishes kept him perpetually bound to the First Lands. As much as he'd been tempted to simply kill his tormentors and be done with it, he had always completed his favors owed. He'd never stepped on any divine toes, and if Jifa was the best reason the Magus could come up with for her master wanting him dead, then it had to be something else. Every Jinni that had ever had the misfortune to be trapped in the First Land had been forced to twist a wish for the good of all. As far as he knew, his slate was clean. He had no enemies. So why would the wind save him from certain death only to enslave him again? Touch him. Touch her, they had whispered. Claim your wish. Until hearing those words, he hadn't even considered touching the Fury, for he knew most men lost hands for doing so. But as an act of desperation, trembling under the shadow of her sword, it had seemed like a reasonable enough thing to do at the time. Now, looking back, he wondered if it had meant something more. There had been that odd pang upon first meeting her eyes as she rounded the fig palm. That strange sense of connectedness that had quickly been forgotten the moment she began taunting him into a duel. Touch her. Claim your wish. Suddenly, every muscle in Akrab's body went stiff as iron. Many years ago, he had made a wish. If you are going to continue to stare at me like a fool, I will take your silence as a rejection of my offer and begin my journey to the Serpent's Mountains without you. A self-wish, Akrab had thought, that had never been fulfilled. Many years ago, he'd been wandering the night-darkened desert of the First Lands, after yet another broken heart with yet another all-too-passionate Jinni woman, one who had grown tired of the fire they had kindled together, and went looking for flames of a different color. He'd been alone amongst the dunes in agony, racked to the core. It had been the first time he'd twisted to the First Realm, spurred by his broken heart, fleeing the hopelessness of that lonely little tent. Fleeing the hopelessness of that lonely little tent he had once shared. He had thought she was the one, his soul-kin, his life-mate, that one perfect bond that the gods gave every living creature, the other half of his soul, and yet she had simply abandoned him one night, leaving him nothing but a note on his pillow to remember her by. A note, and the scent of another man in their bedding. Very well. I'll see you again once I've conferred with the dragons, Jinni. She turned and strode out of the cabin. That night, after twisting into the First Lands out of sheer agony, Akrab had fallen to his knees and made a wish. May I never bed another woman who is not the mirror to my soul. And once I find her, may she be a slave to my heart. May she seek nothing of me I cannot give. And may she revile the touch of other men. Soulkin, twin flames upon the desert of time. That is what he had wished for. A stupid wish, a wish made in the furnace of passion, and quickly forgotten, for most self-wishes dissolved like licks of flame across the sands of time, never to take hold, never to be bound by law. He'd simply forgotten. After all, only a week later he had found himself imprisoned by a First-Lander magus who had received word of a Jinni wandering the desert, cursing the stars. He'd spent the next few centuries being passed around like a favorite piece of furniture before he'd managed to free himself and return to the Firelands. And by then, his wish had been completely forgotten in his relief to be home, sleeping in his own bed, sharing kisses with pretty Jinni women that caught his eye at his father's table. But he hadn't bedded them, Akrab realized. He had flirted, he had bantered, he had diced, he had danced, but he had never bedded them. He'd never been able to. He had always considered this to be his own scarred heart, protecting itself, keeping him at a distance, but what if it was more? What if that was why his icy mistress was the only one who seemed to be able to rouse his passion of late? Sweet goddess, Akrab whispered, sliding to his knees, staring at the open doorway where the magus had disappeared. He put his palms to the wool rug beneath him and bent his head, praying to his deity, the mistress of creation and light. This cannot be. He had meant a Jinni woman, someone he could have a home with. And yet, he had the soul-hammering knowledge that it could. In a rash, stupid blaze of passion, he had wished for loyalty, for the lack of passion that drove women to seek other men. He had wished for a perfect complement to himself, someone who would never betray his heart, someone who reviled the touch of men, and someone who wanted nothing of him aside from his simple death. A fury. Never had he been so horrified, so utterly dismayed by the results of a wish. The tether binding him to his magus strained as he reached the edge of his 500 cubits, and in his shock, Akrab let it drag him out the door on his knees. A cold, distant ice queen, trained from birth to despise the touch of a man. She came from destruction and war, he from life and creation. He was passionate and vibrant, she stiff and cold. He was rowdy and lewd, she prudish and quiet. He took pleasure in creation, she in the kill. She was exactly what he'd asked for. The opposite side of the coin. The weave on the other side of the rug. The gods, merciless dick farmers that they were, had given him a fury to ice his bed from now to eternity. I wanted a Jinni, he whispered to the sky. Sweet mistress, please, not a fury. A Jinni. Yet he had never, he realized with growing dread, Yet he had never, he realized with growing dread, specified a Jinni woman in his wish. Like a fool, he had asked for coldness, a lack of needs, and a disgust of men. But a fury? Surely the gods were joking. His words had been said in passion, but his meaning had been there. His perfect mate was just as passionate, as life-loving and sexual as he was, not that. Then teach her. A whisper came, flitting upon the grasses by his forehead, caressing his back. Give her the passion of a Jinni. Mistress, please, Akrab said, trembling now as the magus pulled him blithely toward the dragon's domain by his law-made tether. There are some things that can't be done. Not with 1,000 lifetimes. Not even a wish could accomplish such a task. He had planned on tricking her into spreading her legs for him, a game to see if she would let him plant his seed so he could turn in. A game to see if she would let him plant his seed so he could in turn show her how it felt to be enslaved to a creature of another realm. The idea of being forced to settle with her forever, due to a brash wish he made millennia ago in the throes of passion, was intolerable. And now she was intent on trading him to the serpents? Please, this was not my wish. The warm winds disappeared, leaving him alone as the magus dragged him through the woods behind her. With the heart-searing knowledge that his casual game of chance was suddenly no longer a game, Akrab twisted to the fourth realm in despair.
It was at that point he knew he fucked up. Alrighty, nice.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you. Well, your writing is enthralling. Alrighty, everybody. That will bring us to the conclusion of the first exciting installment of Alaskan Fury. And we shall be back for more. Well, thank you. I mean, you're the author, so if I'm blowing you away, makes me happy. Yeah, we shall be back for more. If you haven't yet, I would highly recommend checking out the cold read for Alaskan Fire on the Soundbooth Theater app in anticipation of the upcoming release. Yeah, should be same day and time next week. If anything changes, I'll let you know. Thank you, Lorraine, for joining us. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, I shall see you all
In 7 days' time.
and we'll figure out exactly how they get out of this one. Akrob knew he fucked up. How's he gonna unfuck the fuck up? Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon.